Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Vicki O'Doherty, a member of the Worship Committee for UU Catskills. Our minister is the Reverend Bob Janis-Dillon, who is here with us this Sunday. We welcome friends, guests, and members to our online service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on your life's journey, you are welcome here. At UU Catskills, we are a welcoming congregation for the LGBTQ community. We affirm that Black Lives Matter. We are a congregational affiliate of the Ulster Immigrant Defense Network, and we are active voices in the effort to address climate change. Unitarian Universalism is a liberal religious faith that carries no creed and welcomes all seekers. We are guided by 7 principles and 6 sources that encompass the many ways that we come to know and understand the world, the universe, and the divine. If you are new, we encourage you to visit our website at uucatskills.org. If you would like to be added to our mailing list, please give us your email in the chat box or online at uucatskills.org. I remind everyone that during the service you are encouraged to stay muted if you're online. I have a few announcements. Be sure to read our latest newsletter for the upcoming activities at UU Catskills. Some of the following information is available in the most recent weekly update. Sunday, the grief support group is at 7 p.m. via Zoom, and contact Leela Clark if you're interested. Wednesday, the Racial Justice Working Group invites people to attend a virtual lecture called The Culture of Diversity, Belonging, Inclusion, and Equity, Creating and Manifesting Belonging, and that's with Dr. Darnisa Amante Jackson. The lecture is part of SUNY New Pulse's Distinguished Lecture Series. Her talk addresses building sustaining cultures of equity and inclusion in classrooms, campuses, and communities. Pre-registration is required. Check the UU Catskills weekly update for further information about attending, as well as for the Zoom gathering after the lecture with Reverend Bob to discuss Dr. Amante Jackson's work. Thursday, Bedtime Story and More will be at 7 p.m. It's a peaceful, joyful time of connection. Children and youth of all ages are welcome. On Friday, join UUCC's Climate Action Team in a weekly rally at 11 a.m. at Academy Green in Kingston. Everyone is welcome to come to show your support for climate action. There's a correction in the newsletter listing for the Climate Action Team's next meeting. The team will meet on Tuesday, November 16th at 5 p.m. via Zoom. Contact Kathy Kastner for more information. Is Kathy here? Oh, okay. If you want more, ask me. We are starting small group events called Soul Matters groups, which are an opportunity to be a part of a monthly group that explores our lives through deep sharing and connection. The sessions are organized around our monthly congregational themes. For instance, October was cultivating relationships, and November is holding history. Participants are welcome to share as much or as little as they like from their own experience in a facilitated, deep listening format. Reverend Bob and I will be facilitating the groups. For more information, or if you're interested in attending, contact Reverend Bob at uucatskills.org. We also have a way of painlessly participating in supporting the congregation, which are called gift cards. And Geraldine is over there, and she actually has some. And she says I'm one of her only customers. My wife Leela and I, we're it, okay? So I suggest, it's painless, it's for Mother Earth and Adam. So if you happen to shop, which I imagine everybody does, you might want to do that, okay? That's our announcements. Our Prelude is performed by Bill Toole this morning. Thank you, Bill.
Each week we light our chalice as a reminder of the light within each of us, the light of love and kindness and hope and inspiration, the light that resides in each of us. And this week, Karen has graciously agreed to light our chalice. I invite Karen forward to light our chalice. I invite us to read together our chalice lighting words. We light this chalice in grateful, loving community. Even in the darkest of times, may its flame light paths to courage, justice, and hope. And we join in our unison affirmation. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love to all living beings. May we know once again that we are not isolated but connected in wonder and in joy to mystery and miracle in the universe, in this community, and in each other. Well, welcome everybody. It's so good to be with you all in this space across various homes and in our communities. Welcome wherever you are joining us from, whether it's in the Catskill regions or beyond, or even if you're joining us watching on YouTube in days or years to come. It's good to be together. It's really good to join. We know these are challenging times. We're limited with how many people we can have in our sanctuary, so we're rotating. Each of us are rotating. I guess I'm not, which would be great because I can take a Sunday off. But everybody else, we're all. So it's hard, I know, to not be able to attend services in your own space. But we're trying to do it as democratically as possible. So we're all taking turns as this allows. This virus, unfortunately, is still with us. We ask that you keep masks on throughout the service, even during the music, if you mumble along. We know this is not ideal, but we also know we're doing what we can to be there for one another in inspiration and in service and to protect one another and as well. Today's service is why Americans are so religious, and I know that's a sort of a controversial, perhaps, well, not a controversial statement, but can be a challenging topic. And I'll say more about that as it goes on. But the readings are kind of saying that we can be religious in different ways, or indeed we can be non-religious, as many of us are. And we'll say more of that as we go on. But I'll begin with someone that I'll be talking about later in our story, some words by the amazing transcendentalist, Margaret Fuller. And she says, "When I feel, as I do this morning, the poem of existence, I am prepared for all trial." Say that again. When I feel, as I do this morning, the poem of all existence, I am prepared for all trial. So may it be. Let us sing together a song of our ongoing traditions. Song number, it's number 187. It sounds along the edges. So we have a heart story here today, and our younger children, we're all children, aren't we? But our younger children are next door in religious education. So one of our little bit older children, I would like to invite, would anyone be willing to open our wonder box this morning, a reminder of the wonder we experienced? Oh, Bobby. If you would, and show us what is our introduction for our story.
Oh my.
Oh, I'm on the other side. I'll crack it open. A pine cone, yes, I wonder why it's a pine cone. Well, as you may see in your order of service on the screen or in front of you, this is about the life and thought of Margaret Fuller. And you may never have heard of Margaret Fuller, or you may know of her. She was one of the transcendentalists. And as I say, I'm talking about different forms of religion a little bit in this service. And transcendentalism is one of our main sources as Unitarian Universalists. It's one we treasure. And often, as is so often the case in history, the men get more credit than they deserve. Emerson and Thoreau and Whitman are all important transcendentalists. But in many ways, Fuller is the key to the whole transcendentalist revolution. And it was a revolution in spiritual thought. So I'm not going to say a whole lot about it. There's a wonderful biography written about her that I recommend to you. But I'll say a little bit about her life, and then I want to share one of her spiritual experiences. So Margaret Fuller was a polymath. She spoke lots of different languages, an amazing student. Her father believed in equality of education, which was rare in those days. And she became one of the main transcendentalist figures, and she edited a newsletter called The Dial, which was one of the kind of the heart of the transcendentalist revolution. And she also held these meetings in her house, which were men and women, but more women than men, which was kind of the lifeblood of the transcendentalist revolution. And these ideas would come, and Emerson would attend as well. They were close. So that was, Margaret Fuller's life was dedicated to that, and she was far from just an intellectual, though she was intellectually extremely a genius. And she wrote Women in the 19th Century, a pioneering feminist tract. And she wrote poetry. She was a woman of many talents. And she was also interested, she was employed as a journalist to go and study the things that were happening in Europe. It was an exciting time in Europe with fomenting revolution and political change. And she was never content to be just an impartial observer. She became involved in the Italian Revolution, the Republic, which was a democratic movement in the 19th century, after our revolution, but an important one. And she actually married an Italian by the name of Asili. Can't remember his first name now. Anyway, I don't know at all. But it was a tragic ending, unfortunately. They had a child together, and they were drowned on a ship going back to, she had a foreboding that something was going to happen, and indeed her and her husband and her child died in drowning. So it was a tragic ending to the story. But her transcendentalism survives today, and it's a big, we don't use the word transcendentalism a lot, but it's a major force in American thought. If you're watching a show on Apple View or Netflix or whatever all these things are, there's probably a little bit of transcendentalism in there. And what is transcendentalism? Transcendentalism is this idea of the immediacy of experience. It was loosely based on Immanuel Kant. I don't know how many of the Boston transcendentalists actually read Kant. Kant's long to read. But basically the idea is that each one of us can be a religious observer of our own lives. And the pine cone is apart because nature was very important to the transcendentalists. So I wanted to share this one experience that happened early in Margaret Fuller's life. I believe she was about 21. And it happened on Thanksgiving Day. And it happened, there was a service, and you won't believe this, but she went to a service and she found it boring. It was a Unitarian service, and she had grown up Unitarian. You know, she pretty much remained Unitarian, but she didn't go to church much as she grew up because she just found it a bit dull. I mean, you never have that experience. But she left on Thanksgiving Day, and we're in November, so it's good, in 1831, and she went out into the day and went out into nature. That's why the pine cone was mentioned. And she spent a few hours walking through the fields, right? An experience any one of us could have. And she came upon a stream, and not much of a stream. She said it was shrunken, voiceless, choked with withered leaves, and she sat down by a pool, and she had a transcendent experience. She wrote in her journal, "I did not think. All was dark and cold and still. Suddenly the sun shone out with that transparent sweetness, like the last smile of a dying lover, which it will use when it has been unkind all a cold autumn day. And even then passed into my thought a beam from its true sun, from its native sphere, which has never since departed from me. I remembered how, a little child, I had stopped myself one day on the stairs and asked, how come I here? How is it that I seem to be this Margaret Fuller? What does it mean? What shall I do about it? I remembered all the times and ways which the same thought had returned. I saw how long it must be before the soul can learn to act under these limitations of time and space and human nature. But I saw also that it must do it, that it must make all this false true and sow new and immortal plants in the garden of God before it could return again. I saw that there was no self, that selfishness was all folly and the results of circumstance, that it was only because I thought self real that I suffered, that I had only to live in the idea of the all, and all was mine. This truth came to me, and I received it unhesitatingly, so that I was for that hour taken up into God. In that true ray, most of the relations of earth seemed mere films, phenomena. So that's one spiritual experience. I hope it might resonate with you, and that inspired Margaret Fuller to live her amazing life onwards. So there, introduce you to one of our great spiritual ancestors, the Margaret Fuller. Now we have a second religious experience from another of our spiritual ancestors that we draw great strength from. I would consider her to be America's Shakespeare. There's different contenders for that, I suppose. But Zora Neale Hurston is one of our greatest bards and writers. She was, I believe, a non-theist and atheist, but she wrote compellingly about religion and about spirituality. And this is about her connection to the universe. Again, it's different than Margaret Fuller, but I thought it would be nice to hear multiple perspectives here. So this is from her memoir, which I recommend to you, Dust Tracks on a Road, by Zora Neale Hurston and Vicky O'Doherty. Thank you, Vicky.
Seems to me to be true that heavens are placed in the sky because it is unreachable. The unreachable and therefore the unknowable always seems divine, hence religion. People need religion because the great masses fear life and its consequences. Its responsibilities weigh heavy. Feeling a weakness in the face of great forces, men seek an alliance with omnipotence to bolster up their feelings of weakness, even though the omnipotence they rely upon is a creature of their own minds. It gives them a feeling of security. Strong, self-determining men are notorious for their lack of reverence. Constantine, having converted millions to Christianity by the sword, himself refused the consolation of Christ until his last hour. Some say, not even then. As for me, I do not pretend to read God's mind. If he has a plan of the universe worked out to the smallest detail, it would be folly for me to presume to get down on my knees and attempt to revise it. That to me seems the highest form of sacrilege, so I do not pray. I accept the means at my disposal for working out my destiny. It seems to me that I have been given a mind and willpower for that very purpose. It seems to me that organized creeds are collections of words around a wish. I feel no need for such. However, I would not, by word or deed, attempt to deprive another of the glance of the archangels, at the archangels. The springing of the yellow line of morning out of the misty deep of dawn is glory enough for me. I know that nothing is destructible. Things merely change forms. When the consciousness we know as life ceases, I know that I shall still be part and parcel of the world. I was a part before the sun rolled into shape and burst forth in the glory of change. I was when the earth was hurled out of its fiery rim. I shall return with the earth to Father Sun, and still exist in substance when the sun has lost its fire and disintegrated in infinity to perhaps become a part of the whirling rubble in space. Why fear? The stuff of my being is matter, ever changing, ever moving, but never lost. So what need of denominations and creeds to deny myself the comfort of all my fellow men? The wide belt of the universe has no need for finger rings. I am one with the infinite and need no other assurance. Well, that is the way things stand up to now. I can look back and see sharp shadows, highlights, and smudgy in-betweens. I have been in sorrow's kitchen and licked out all the pots. Then I have stood on the peaky mountains wrapped in rainbows with a harp and a sword in my hands.
Well, now we come onto a time of contemplation and reflection, meditation, and prayer. And we will have Joys and Concerns in 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. For this time, I will ask, are there any, if there are anybody to lift up on our hearts, or to collectively, if there's anything to mention in our collective prayer. And I will say one, which is Stan Goldstein, who's well known and loved by many in this congregation, news that he has moved to Ferncliff Nursing Home in Rhinebeck, and they do take visitors, so do ask about that, and I'm sure Stan would be delighted for friends to visit. Any other pastoral notes or anything to keep on our hearts as we enter this time of prayer? You can say in the chat if it's on the, it's on here and I'll see it. Okay. So we'll have a brief spoken prayer followed by a time of silence and meditation. And this prayer comes a little bit out of the transcendentalism as well, transcendentalist service. You can open up the Bible and find truth, I know. Or you can open up your eyes on an autumn evening. The birches stretch up to caress the sky, grasses rustle millionfold in the breeze, hummingbirds defy gravity. You can watch the birds travel from tree to tree, hear the river ripple. The world is abuzz with the choir of movement and life. You can be alive and alone and totally surrounded by beauty. Religion, we know, means a great many things to a great many people, but before we know anything of God or philosophy or creed, we know what it is to live in wonder. The first word we ever speak is our first steps, our tenuous dance into the beyond. We know what it is to live beyond ourselves. We play before we're old enough to walk, and we speak the language of the soul before we ever form words. So I want to invite you in this shared silence to notice your breath and bring awareness once again to how simply amazing it is to be alive. You are a part of something, an outer world that reflects your inner world. Strive to find that balance between the universe and the human heart. You can go into the temple and find truth, I know, or you can flip the pages of the human heart, and you will find written upon your heart glory and despair, beauty and pain. And you will find perseverance, that carrying on, and you will find grace, the Spirit walking around the chambers of the heart. Our heart goes out in this shared time for all who are suffering, for all who are in grief, for all who are looking for a way to carry on and do not know the way. May they find in the wonderful mystery of silence something that breathes hope into the most desperate corners of the soul, and may they know beauty everywhere. Peace be in our lives and in our communities and in our world. Our offering this morning is to the Worker Justice Center of New York, which helps promote and establish worker justice for agricultural workers and other low-paid workers. It ties in very with what we're talking about today, about the insecurity felt by so many in American life, and if we can help those lobby for those who are struggling the most, that we have a more equitable. So we share the plate, and we're honored to share the plate this morning, the offering, with the Worker Justice Organization. You can give in a variety of ways. You can text 833-643-0430 and put the number in there. You can give online. You can send a check to the congregation, or you can give in person. Thank you for all who give to this congregation. I wanted to say as well, thank you to all who make these services possible. There's a lot of volunteerism that goes on, so thank you so much to Jenny and Bruce and Pat and Vicky and Bill and Tom, and I'll forget all the names, but there are so many people that make this possible. So thank you to everyone who helps make this congregation thrive and grow. We're so grateful that this is a place of such abundant generosity, which is what makes this possible. So now we'll have our offering, a wonderful work by J.S. Johann Sebastian Bach. Our sermon this morning is a little bit heady, featuring thoughts on American religion, on history's effects on politics and psychology and the future of the world. So I suppose I should begin by telling you about my new kitten. His name is Chuck. He came with that name, and he's a gray-haired tabby, 4 months old, adorable, great jumper, climber, wonderful cuddler, fast runner, clever. Having a kitten has livened up my little house, as you can imagine. And there are plenty of anxieties that come with welcoming a new 6-pound ball of genius and fur into the household. I can show you the kitten and bite marks to prove it. But I find the most difficult part for me, and this reminds me a little bit of being a new parent as well to some extent, was leaving Chuck at home alone. Didn't do that with a newborn, but still a similar feeling of, would he be all right? I kitten-proofed the home as best I could, tied up the curtain poles, shut the cabinets. I have a wonderful cat sitter to check on him. But even so, how could I be certain, absolutely certain, that my little angel would be okay? I couldn't, of course. So I had to do my best with not knowing. With the grand tapestry of life and death and human beings and kittens being a heck of a lot bigger than I was, and me not knowing all the answers. Americans are religious people. Study after study has confirmed that the people of the United States, and to some extent the Americas in general, this holds true for Latin America to some extent as well, I believe, are on average more religious than our counterparts in Europe and much of Asia. I'm not sure about the subcontinent, which may be a different, maybe similar to America, I'm not sure. Americans tend to be religious. As with any of these pronouncements, it depends a little bit on how you define religious. Some of the studies ask about belief in God, but you can be religious without believing in God, as in some forms of Buddhism or secular Judaism, or indeed in Unitarian Universalism. But on just about any marker, people in the United States come up as more religious, on average, more observant of religious traditions than in France or Germany or South Korea. And sociologists have noted that usually religiosity tracks inversely with income. So-called third world nations are more religious on average than more industrialized first world nations. But America is the outlier of this trend. We are extremely wealthy as a nation and also extremely religious. I've been fascinated to explore why, because I think the answer might hold a little clue to who we are as Americans, whether we are personally religious or not. But before delving in, I need to acknowledge that this is an emotionally charged subject. I am 100% and painfully certain that there are several people in this room, whether in person or people watching on the screen as well, that have been harmed by religion, by expressions of religion, by someone's emotionally or physically violent expression of their religion. People have been judged, cast out, banished, name-called, been told they're going to hell, been threatened with eternal damnation, and bullied in this life, some to suicide. My great-grandfather had rocks thrown at him on his way to school, my grandmother tells me, because he was Jewish. His experience was not unusual, and many people have had it worse. Though I am extremely interested in religion, as you might expect, passionate about it, have spent years studying it, I have no interest in excusing the expressions of religion that are inexcusable. From the Crusades to human sacrifice, religion has been a force for evil through the centuries, as well as a spur to good, to incredible personal virtue and service. Christianity is the predominant religion in this country, and usually, thus, the main oppressor here. But in the Muslim slums of Mumbai, the persecuted Kurdish regions of the Middle East, or in the Palestinian territories, it is not primarily Christianity that is the aggressor. We human beings have a knack for turning just about any belief system into a means of coercive control and a justification for violence. That's an awful truth. But it's also true that it doesn't have to be that way and isn't always that way. Religion justified slavery in the minds of many slave owners, but it was also the hope of many human beings who were enslaved and gave a framework for liberation, from Dr. Martin Luther King to Malcolm X. Today, over 70% would define themselves as religious in African American communities, Native American communities, Hispanic communities, according to Pew Research. Predominantly Christian, though their faith often incorporates older traditions, such as the original religions of this continent, in the case of Native Americans. And we probably all know wonderful people in our lives who are motivated by their faith to wonderful acts of service and generosity. Even if their faith is different than ours, we can admire that motivation and the goodness that it engenders. If we are going to try and understand who we are as Americans, we're going to have to try and understand American religion, the bad and the good. I don't know how far we'll get in the next 8 minutes or so, but let me start with a bold statement that kind of sets the course for everything else. Americans are a displaced people. We are a displaced people. Now that is a generalization, I'm sure, but one that holds true, I think, across the spectrum of American history and American life. The Trail of Tears, the displacement of so many First Nations on this continent. The slave ships, crammed full of human beings with hopes and dreams and personalities, part of families and communities, ripped from their lives into unimaginable horrors. The indentured servants who came here under much better conditions than that, but were a long way from home and life was very hard for them. Even the immigrants who chose to come here did not, in most cases, face an easy life. They left their homes and traveled across a frightening, gigantic ocean on a perilous voyage. They must have had a compelling reason to do so. Many were fleeing something at home, as they still are today, as many immigrants to America still are today. Religious persecution, or a family that didn't accept them, or violence. Often they came here with next to nothing. So if I may generalize, American religion is a religion of displaced people. There's a few ramifications of that. For one thing, it often harkens back to the past, to the old ways. You'll notice there aren't a lot of Mennonites and Amish in Europe. And arguably, the Southern Baptists and the American Catholics are the forces most keen on preserving a form of Christianity that was prevalent in the 18th century, while most of the rest of the world has moved on. Now, there's an irony here, isn't there? We Americans are new, modern, cutting edge in so many ways, business, science, and technology. And in our religion, we are on average more traditionalist than most others. I think maybe it's a yin and yang thing, or even ego and subconscious. The more we reach for new frontiers, even expanding our reach into orbit, the more we want to keep a little candle burning in our inner hearth, a candle that points us back to the old country. Another way that American religion is a religion of displaced people is that we want our religion to help us navigate the world. Religion can serve many different purposes. It's not monolithic. Religion can be a gateway into wonder, it can be a hypothesis on the afterlife. It performs a normative function in our collective life. In America, I think one of the heightened roles is as a tool for helping us make our way in life. We note that both biblical fundamentalism and self-help books are both very popular. And perhaps that's because we feel adrift. As a displaced people, we need some path from A to B. As scholars such as Karen Armstrong have pointed out, fundamentalism actually grew up together with modernism. Fundamentalism was in many ways a reaction to modernism. You had Darwin and Einstein explaining that the world was not as simple as it appears. It was complicated and subtle and nuanced and hard to understand. And you had modernist Bible critics pointing out that the Bible was written by people and was complicated and had context and this context was important for understanding what the Bible was really about. And maybe the Bible wasn't infallible. And Americans led the fundamentalist reaction to it. It wasn't just in America, but we were certainly one of the main impetuses. We had already been displaced once. It was in our bones. We weren't going to be displaced again. Fundamentalists wanted the Bible to be clear and understandable, a roadmap to life that you could follow step by step. As a bibliophile and a Bible-phile from the religious liberal tradition, I have to say it's hard to find a less suitable set of books for this than the Bible, but whatever. Religious liberals, in which our Unitarian Universalist tradition is very much ensconced, are arguably a little more comfortable with ambiguity and not having a roadmap to life. We eschew dogma, claim to anyway. And yet, can we honestly say we don't feel some of the same anxieties about not always knowing the way from A to B, about being somewhat of a displaced people as our more fundamentalist brethren? We also want to feel at home in the world. In almost every American Unitarian Universalist congregation, community is one of the main values that congregants cite as important to them. A place where I can be myself and feel at home with others who share my values. Think about that statement with reference to the American history that I just described, our displacements. A place where I can be myself and feel at home with others who share my values. No wonder that is so deeply ingrained and so important. Our socioeconomics reinforces our shared sense of isolation. Of wealthy nations, we have one of the very largest income gaps between rich and poor, unfortunately. And income inequality is linked with religiosity in study after study. When you don't have any security protecting you from the lights being switched off by the electric company, or kicked out of your apartment, or thrown into jail by hostile police, you need something to get through life. And that something is often, though not always, religion. So there you go. I think I got it in under 8 minutes, actually. Americans on the whole are quite religious, but you knew that. So what? And I know we're in danger here of entering the unenviable territory of interesting sermon, Pastor. A sermon that is, mildly interesting, food for thought, but doesn't really say anything. And I want to aim a little higher than that. Can't always reach it every week, but I want to tell you who you are and how we save the world. The COP26, the COP26 climate conference is happening this week in Glasgow. The world leaders meeting to try and find a way to reduce our carbon output and save the planet from our own industrialized ways. And I have to tell you, there are times when I feel a bit hopeless. I don't always feel secure that we're going to make it as a species, and who knows. But if we do make it as a species, from what I hear from other American liberals, I sometimes think that American liberals think that every other country on the globe must hate us, must hate Americans as the dominant force. Now, I'm not very well traveled. I've been to a few countries a lot, and most countries I've never been to. But on my limited travels, I've found that people don't, on the whole, hate Americans. They know we're powerful, and they know there's problematics with that being powerful. But people are often fascinated by America. We're a fascinating country. An early experiment in democracy, and yes, it does often go awry, but people often across the world follow it. And America is a place of dreams, of ideals, of experiments, and that has captivated the world as well. People everywhere have been inspired and love American music, and by American music we're talking primarily about the music that was cultivated and invented and resourced and sourced by African Americans. People love Hollywood, a town founded in the desert by Jews and others, and was almost a place of dreams, built out of dreams. A mirage in many ways, and yet it was a place, and continues to some extent to be a place of resistance, meaning-making, and hope. Now, there's plenty to dislike about American hegemony, our misuse of power, but America is fascinating too. So let's not give in to self-hatred on the collective national scene. And increasingly, just about everywhere on earth is following our lead in terms of we're all a displaced people. Traditional societies are becoming uprooted. Climate change and industrialization have severed our usual ties to the earth, to our surroundings, to our communities, to the seasons. All of these connections have been changed and challenged, and in some cases severed. And this is a tragedy. It may have some redeeming qualities, some new arisings, but still, it's a tragedy. It's, in many cases, already happened. We already cannot really go back to the past because we wouldn't know how to get there. We already are a displaced people globally. The question is, what next? You remember Chuck, right? You thought I was going to leave Chuck at the beginning of the sermon. Oh, you people of little faith. I'll bring him back. Now, I don't really know what Chuck's religion is, and that fascinates me. I do think about it, but I don't think I'll ever crack that nut. But I know a little bit about mine, and I know when I leave Chuck behind in the house that I worry about him, and I need to think about what is it that I need, and I need to know there's some sort of reality, something holding him as well as holding me as we are apart. Now, as a person and as a minister, I've been a witness to far too many personal tragedies to believe that Chuck or myself are free from the calamities of life. They happen to us all from time to time. And maybe it's just the universe and not a personal God holding us both in its tender arms. And I'm more or less okay with that. I just need to be reminded that I'm not in control. And in some sense, beyond the individual lives of our events, I can trust in the universe. I have that sense that Margaret Fuller talked about feeling part, or Zora Neale Hurston, about part and parcel with the everything. It doesn't mean that everything goes right. It feels that I can trust that I'm part and parcel of this magnificent mystery. Even so, that's a big ask. but it's one of the foundational asks of religion. The next 50 years are going to bring alarming levels of uncertainty and anxiety into our lives. I know we wish that when COVID subsides that we'll be done with it, but there's going to be more uncertainty and anxiety. And it's hard because not only that, we've become displaced from who we are. Very few of us human beings in the 21st century feel utterly at home all the time. And if you do, that's great. But even though this planet has been our home, our only home, for millions of years, we don't feel quite so at home. And I think we need, religion may be the wrong term, because we're not all religious, but we need something that can help us live side by side with the unknown. And we need to recreate a sense of home, which is not easy to do after you have been displaced. And as a modern human being, you probably have been displaced, and it's hard. And it's not your fault, and it's happened. But if anybody can recreate that sense of home, we can. We're not going to do it alone as this congregation or as Unitarian Universalists, but if we do manage together to create a new sense of home, if we reinvent religion or meaning-making as something that acknowledges and incorporates the irreducible mystery, if we learn what it is as a people to live together in some new chaotic international balance, some new peace amidst our human diversity, and with all our family, the animals and all life forms, it will be the most marvelous thing our curious, really quite impressive species has ever pulled off. It will make rockets into space look like child's play. So let's begin, right? Let's, this week, try and make someone else feel a little more at home in this world that can feel like we're all displaced all the time. That's sacred work, I think, special work. Let's come together in our glorious diversity, which is such a beautiful thing, and together come home again. Amen. So we will sing a song, number 120, Turn Back. friends, may kindness be our weapon. May goodness and generosity be our wealth. And may our inheritance and I forgot the closing of this one. You don't have to get everything right. What's important is the kindness you have in your heart, the love, the intention, being one with our neighbor, and learning again how to make this place a home. We can make this place home for one another here at the Catskills and everywhere around the world. Let's make this place home for one another again. Amen. Say together our extinguishing the chalice words. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. From you I receive, to